Welcome back, everyone. I am feeling a little bit frantic today as I'm recording this because I actually had a completely different episode ready to go for you. And then yesterday, it occurred to me that maybe I needed to lay some groundwork for that episode first. The conversation I was going to record is all about peace and how to create a peaceful family culture. And I am still going to share that with you just next week instead. But as I was working through it, I realized that the way I think about peace might not be the way that most of us have been taught to think about it. Because I don't see peace as the absence of chaos or noise or hard times. For me, it's really rooted in the difference between abundance and scarcity. And while we talk about that in the next episode, this is really where I felt like we needed to slow it down because those two words can get thrown around in a way that feels really oversimplified. Like abundance just means a positive mindset, and scarcity just means a negative one. And that's not actually what I mean. Because if that were true to me, most of us could just decide to think differently and then everything would shift and change. But that's not how it actually works. Because I know you've had those moments, probably even recently, where you do have an abundant perspective. You do know what matters. You do respond with patience and connection, and you feel like you have plenty of space and time and capacity. But then something happens, like your kids are fighting, or you hit all the red lights on the way back from work, and all of that perspective just disappears. And then suddenly everything feels tighter, like there's not enough time, not enough patience, not enough money, not enough capacity to hold what's happening. And then it's really easy to think, what is wrong with me? Why can't I keep it together? How come everything goes wrong? But what if that's not actually what's happening? What if it's not that you don't have an abundant perspective, but that in certain moments you just lose access to it? That is the piece I think is often missing from this conversation. Abundance isn't a mindset you either have or you don't have. And scarcity isn't a flaw in your personality. They are states that you move in and out of. When you're in a more regulated and grounded place, you can hold on to things like complexity. Okay. You can see more than one truth at the same time. But when your system starts to feel overwhelmed or rushed or out of control, everything like narrows. It becomes this either or way of thinking. It's right or wrong. Like this shouldn't be happening. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. It's not just what abundance and scarcity are, but what's actually happening when you lose access to one and drop into the other, and then how to find your way back. So let's start with what I actually mean when I say abundance, because I am definitely not talking about blind optimism or toxic positivity, or even trying to convince yourself that everything is good when it's not. I am defining abundance as your capacity to hold more than one truth at the same time. And one of the simplest ways to hear that is in the word and. Abundance sounds like, okay, this is rough and I can handle it. My house is messy and it's still safe and good. My kids are loud and they're awesome. I'm tired and I'm still connecting with them. There's room for more than one thing to be true. Because in order to hold that and, your system has to feel safe enough to expand into it. In order to not rush into fixing or controlling, it has to be able to stay open. And this is where you can start to notice that you have access. Because when you're in that space, when you can say and, there's usually a little more space between what's happening and how you respond. You can see your child's behavior and still see your child. You can feel your own frustration and not lose yourself in it. Okay. That is what abundance actually looks like in real life. Not perfection, access. Okay. Access to connection and to pause and space for all the things. But then this is the other part, and that's scarcity. And we sometimes think that scarcity is the opposite of abundance, but I don't think that's necessarily true. And this is where I'm offering you a new way of seeing this. Okay. Scarcity is what happens when that capacity narrows, When the and disappears, or our access to the and drifts just a little bit out of our reach. Then everything starts to sound like this is too much. This shouldn't be happening. I can't handle this. It becomes that either or. Either this goes the way I need it to, or everything is going to fall apart. And again, this is so important. That move from abundance to scarcity isn't because you've suddenly become a different parent. It's because something in your system no longer feels safe to hold both things at the same time. So it simplifies. It moves straight into protection mode. And that might feel really familiar. Like you can go from grounded and present to overwhelmed and reactive really, really quickly. But why? Why do we lose that access to capacity? This is not about willpower, and it's not about you needing to try harder to stay in an abundant mindset. Because the moment you feel overwhelmed or rushed or out of control, your system moves into protection. And when it does that, it's not prioritizing connection or perspective or growth. It's prioritizing safety. And safety for your nervous system often looks like simplifying things as quickly as possible. So instead of holding what might feel like conflicting beliefs, like this is hard and I can handle it, it becomes, "Psh, I give up." Okay. Instead of feeling I'm overwhelmed and I can still show up, it becomes I'm failing. I'm a horrible mom. The grip on everything gets tighter, more urgent, more absolute. And what kills me is that this is framed somehow as a character flaw. We label this response as pessimism or impatience or negativity or sometimes even depression. But the reality is that a lot of this is shaped long before we ever become parents. It is shaped by what we experienced growing up in our own childhoods, how emotions were handled, how much unpredictability there was, whether connection felt consistent or conditional on our behavior. It's also shaped by a culture that tells us we should be able to do more, be more, handle more without ever really slowing down. And it's shaped by our brain's natural negativity bias. And this is the tendency to scan constantly for what's wrong, what's missing, what might go off track. Because from a survival standpoint, that's actually super useful. I can just imagine that when we lived in caves, it probably wasn't super helpful to focus on the resources we had. Like, no, we have 5 berries. That's plenty. No. Oh my gosh. With that mindset, we would have died. Our brains are wired for survival. Where are the shortages? What is missing from this situation? What or who is coming up short? Where will I find the next 5 berries to keep me alive for another day? Physical survival, the way we are wired in our brains and our actual DNA, is very high stakes. But in parenting and relationships, that same wiring can make everything feel higher stakes than it actually is. So when your child is melting down, or your house feels chaotic, or you lose your patience, your system isn't calmly evaluating all of that. I'm giving you examples of that all the time. What it's doing is asking, is something out of control? Am I about to lose something important? Do I need to fix this right now? And that is when scarcity shows up. Not as a belief or a mindset that you're consciously choosing, but as a protective response that's narrowing your capacity. And again, I think this matters so much because without this understanding, we tend to make it mean something about us. But really, what's happening is just that you're losing access to all that abundance, that and. And it happens sometimes really quickly and also really subtly. So if we go back to the cave, it's the difference between thinking, okay, we got this, we can hunt for berries and figure something else out if that doesn't work, or thinking, we need to find berries or we're all going to die tonight. Okay. And as you can imagine, having this decreased access to abundance doesn't just affect your thoughts. It changes how you experience your entire day because everything starts to feel high risk or high cost. Those small moments start to feel really big. Normal behavior feels like a problem that needs to be fixed, and your capacity starts to feel smaller and smaller because you're carrying everything as if it's urgent. That's exhausting, not just physically, but mentally, and emotionally. Because when you're in that space, there's no room to pause and think. There's no room to say, let's see how this plays out. It's just manage, fix, keep things from falling apart because your brain is constantly scanning for what's not working, what needs to change, what needs to stop. Okay? And again, that's not a character flaw, it's wiring, it's conditioning. It's what happens when your system is trying to stay in control of something that feels uncertain. But the cost of that is that it becomes really hard to see what's right here in front of us already. The moments of connection that are a little bit quieter, the times your child is trying, the parts of your relationship that are actually working. They don't register as strongly because your attention is already pulled toward what feels at risk. And maybe the hardest part is what it starts to do internally. Because when everything feels like it's not enough, like the house isn't clean enough, or the kids aren't grateful enough, or the bank balance isn't high enough, you start to feel like you're not enough. Like no matter how much you're doing, it's not landing the way you want it to. And that's where a lot of parents get stuck in scarcity, not because they don't care, but because they've been operating from a place that never really lets them feel like they can trust what's happening. And this is why this conversation matters so much. It's not about following steps to get you out of scarcity. I'm not vilifying scarcity. It's a really important perspective. Okay. What I want is for you to simply understand these perspectives more deeply, to understand what they look like in your day to day life so you can see that you have access to both. You move between them both. The key here is, and I'm always going to bring it back to this, it's awareness, doing the work to act with intention. And then, with intentional and purposeful choices, your parenting transforms. So, this is what these two states actually look like in your day to day life. And you absolutely have access to both. What I want you to think about here is which do you have the easiest access to? Where does your nervous system, your mind, your heart, where do they go first? And which parts do you lose access to quickest when challenges come up? When you have access to abundance, you tend to focus on what's here, not just what's missing. You can see what's working, even if it's imperfect. You can find a version of yes, even inside of something that's inconvenient or hard. Okay? There's a little bit more flexibility in how you think and an ability, not just an ability, but more of a willingness to adjust, to pivot, to consider other perspectives. You're also not as threatened by things that are not going exactly how you planned because there's an underlying sense that you can work with what's in front of you. There will be more time, more chances, more opportunities to repair or connect or try again. And because of that, you're more open, you're more curious, more future oriented. You can zoom out and pause just enough to see possibilities instead of just problems. Okay? Then there's scarcity. And again, this isn't something that you're necessarily choosing. It's something that happens when that sense of space and capacity goes away. Because when you're in scarcity, your focus narrows to what's lacking, what's not working, what you don't have enough of. You don't have enough time, enough patience, energy, support. It can feel isolating, like you're the only one that's carrying this, or the only one that's going through it, or the only one that can fix it. There's less room for risk or experimentation or even curiosity because everything feels like it matters right now. And that is where control starts to come in. You're trying to manage behavior. You're trying to keep things on track. You're trying to prevent things from getting any worse. Because underneath that, there's often fear of things falling apart or of losing that connection with the people that we love or of not being enough or being replaced or getting it wrong in a way that really matters. So your system activates. It goes on high alert. It looks for certainty. It looks for control. It looks for a way to make sure everything turns out okay. And when you put those two things side by side, you can actually feel how different they are and how they affect you, not just in how you think, but in how you're actually experiencing your life. One feels really open and dynamic, like there's room to move, and the other feels very closed and urgent, like everything depends on what happens next. And again, I hope you're seeing how you move between these all the time. I can see how each of these plays out for me, just depending on the time of day it is or what day of the week it is. This isn't about becoming one kind of parent or the other. It's about starting to recognize, where am I at right now? Am I in a space where I have access to options, or am I in a space where everything feels like it has to go one specific way? If you take nothing else from this conversation, please remember, you don't need to become more abundant. You already have that capacity. The work is learning how to come back to that place of abundance when you lose access to it. Now, next week, we're going to build on this because we're going to talk about peace and how to cultivate peace, not as something that comes from everything going right, but as something that's created from this exact place, from your ability to stay grounded and connected, even when life is complicated. So until then, just see what you notice, where you have access and where you don't. And maybe experiment by adding a little bit of and see what changes for you. Now, if this is something you want to explore a little bit more, but a little bit of extra support would be helpful, guys, I am here for you always. I have put together a really amazing 5-day abundant parenting challenge for you. It's not overwhelming, it's not time consuming, and there's no cost involved. When you sign up, I will simply send you one email a day for 5 days with a short reflection and a few little prompts to get you thinking. And my hope is by the end of it, you don't feel like you have to be in abundance all the time, but that you trust yourself a little bit more to find your way back to it. So to join the challenge, just click the link in the show notes, or you can visit theparentinglab.org/abundant to get started. All right. 5 days, 5 emails, 5 minutes a day. That's it. Thank you so much for being here. I'm always so grateful that you spend this time with me. If you haven't had a chance already, please take a moment to review the podcast. Make sure you're following so you don't miss an episode. And I will see you all next week, where we'll continue to explore the art and science of parenting and put your parenting to the test. Take care, everyone.